My name is Krista Weens. I am the Education Coordinator at Central Valley Justice Coalition, a faith-based nonprofit whose mission is to partner with the church and the community to prevent human trafficking.
My name is Adam Galley, and I'm an Associate Professor of Marriage and Family Therapy at Fresno Pacific Biblical Seminary.
I'm Tim Neufeld. I've been in Fresno my whole life. For the last 20 years, I was a professor of biblical and religious studies at Fresno Pacific University, and just recently made a shift, and I'm now a marriage and family therapist.
Even though I teach in a therapy program, I'm interested in this conversation because my interests go far beyond just how therapy helps people. I'm interested in how the church is a healing community, how our leadership and community and spiritual formation and teaching all can play a role in people's general well-being and their spiritual and relational health and their ability to bring goodness to themselves and to others in the church and especially to those beyond the church.
The church has a really great opportunity here. It really is on the front lines of health care for most people. A lot of times people, when they experience some kind of discomfort or impairment, they will go to their pastor, or they'll go to a church leader, or they'll go to a Bible study leader. So we in the church and leadership, we have a great opportunity to listen for what's actually happening in a person's life.
It is our love for the church and our experience with survivors of trafficking and trauma that has led us to create this content, to search for resources which already exist and make them easy to find, to create new videos that can help equip the church to be more fully the body of Christ.
I think rather than seeing these trauma-informed principles as just some separate, independent kind of psychological principles for working with people with trauma, I think we can come to appreciate how these can be more general, effective, and helpful principles for Christian ministry and leadership. I think thinking issues about safety, trustworthiness, collaboration, support, attention to a person's full history, these are all things that the best versions of Christian ministry incorporate for all people, and we can learn about and get better at those in relating to people kind of wherever we are on the psychological spectrum. And so I think we should be paying attention to trauma not simply because it's kind of one specific thing for one group of people that we feel like we have to do and we're a little bit wary of, but rather because it's a way of helping us understand how we can be the best version of leaders and churches and ministers that we've been called to be.
Trauma is more than something that happens to a person. It's the combination of the event itself, the effects of the event within that person's physical body, and the lasting impact of that effect.
Trauma is a human experience, and it reflects different kinds of perspectives. People use the word in different sorts of ways, and talking about human experiences is really different than talking about objects that we can easily define. So if I have an object like this pen, we know what it is, we can look at it, we can talk about it and talk about its characteristics. But human experiences are really different. Take, for example, love. We all know that something like love exists. We usually recognize it when we see it, but not always. But we can't give a precise definition for it. We have people writing books and poems and stories about it, and we often have disagreements about what it is and how it looks. Well, trauma is a little bit like that in terms of human experience because it's really kind of hard to get just one single precise definition that everybody agrees and everybody knows. And this is important because if you don't have an experience yourself, or if you're listening to somebody talk about trauma but you're expecting it to look just one way or have one idea about it, you might miss it.
Trauma can really mean something different for everybody. So for some people, trauma might be as simple as having been in a car accident and having to work through that. For others, it's very complex and goes way back into childhood, might have something to do with sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and there's just a lot to work backwards into. Now, a lot of people will say, why go back? Why think about all that stuff again? Well, there's an advantage to it. While it might get dark, and that's one of the risks of doing therapy, is we actually have to pull up some crud off the bottom The advantage of that is we use that to propel a person forward into the future so that they can now understand and organize and know why they do the things that they do.
One set of trauma reactions includes these 4 different clusters of symptoms or responses that are often present. Re-experiencing events, avoidance behaviors, negative experiences in mood or thinking around the trauma, and hypervigilance or hyperarousal. Re-experiencing symptoms or experiences are these moments where the trauma finds its way back into the person's life in the present, even though those events are in the past. This could come in flashbacks, where a person is in the present, but they're having a real experience of something that happened in the past. Nightmares, which bring those events back into the experience. Or it could happen where people have really strong reactions to things that are happening around them when there's reminders or signals or other events that kind of remind them about what happened in the past, and they're now having a present experience in a strong reaction to what's around them because it's reminding them of the past experience.
The energy from trauma really looks different in different people, but it, in general, builds up in the body. We always say the body keeps score, and then how is that energy released? Well, for some it's in anxiety or depression. For others, it might be in migraine headaches or irritable bowels. For others, it might be in like an odd compulsion or obsession where they just have to fidget with things. For others, it can develop into a personality style where they might be very pleasing and accommodating, trying to make everybody happy. Or the opposite of that, they're just angry people in life and they don't know why they're so angry. A lot of times we can trace that back to something that's happened traumatic in their lives. And when we can do that, then we can help figure out a way forward out of that too.
So what does trauma look like in our churches? Well, it can look like a teen who shows up willingly to every youth group game night, but when it's time for small group, he leaves because he would prefer not to talk about what's happening at home. It can look like a trafficking survivor who comes each week, sits in the back of the sanctuary, always on an aisle seat, making sure that they know they can leave whenever they need to, because for so long they were unable to leave. Or it can look like a person who volunteers at every opportunity because they learned in childhood that the best way to avoid abandonment is to make yourself really useful.
So if you're having questions about whether trauma is something that might be present in someone that you know, or maybe is even something a part of your own life, or if you're wondering what kind of concretely might I be looking for in addition to everything that's been said, you may want to consider whether some of the following are present. Are you thinking about or noticing a strong degree of emotional reactivity? Do people have a hard time being able to kind of be generally calm and level, or is there a high reactivity? You might be noticing some numbing. Are people shutting themselves down? Are they numbing through alcohol or other substances? Do they seem kind of really detached or disconnected? You may also be curious about other kind of addictive patterns that seem really compulsive. You might wonder, is there something where there's real difficulty tolerating difference? Does everything kind of need to be under control and the same? And if another person holds a different perspective or worldview, or if there are other changes to a situation, is that really hard for people? And do people need to have a high degree of control over their situation and they can't handle it if something else is different or going on? These are all different things that, of course, don't necessarily mean that trauma is in play, but they might be worth considering in terms of whether there's other features plus past events that are showing up in the trauma response. We need to understand trauma in part because we can make a positive difference in a person's spirituality if we're able to meet them where we're at and kind of walk alongside the larger journey of healing in order to bring about not only their personal healing but also spiritual healing. Trauma affects a person's spirituality. trauma can lead to people having difficulty in trusting God. People can have really negative views about themselves and about God. And it's not simply enough to just educate people or teach them the right information about God. These are strong psychospiritual reactions that come out of very powerful, painful events. And just providing information about God is not going to be enough to just kind of correct these long and deeply held views about the person's worth and the nature of God. For some people, trauma did not affect their view of God, but still has affected lots of other parts of their life. And in this case, trauma has found some supports through the church or found some healing in a relationship with God. We need to be able to understand other impacts of trauma and where the church can be a resource to support coping or healing. Religion and spirituality in the church have helped people make meaning and find purpose and find other ways to come to grips with this larger trauma experience, even if that trauma experience didn't negatively impact their view of God or the church.
Finally, I'm very excited about the time that we're living in right now, because the stigma of mental health therapy keeps coming down. It's not near as negative as it used to be. And in fact, many of us who are therapists in Fresno, we have long waiting lists. People want the services of a mental health professional. The other thing that I see happening is that pastors are losing the stigma of mental health. Many pastors are coming for their own therapeutic care. And that's just exciting to see. Every pastor I know that has gone in and done some work in their own soul has come out a strong proponent of therapy, of working at trauma in individuals, being able to identify it better in their congregation and having more resources for accessing and sending people towards as well.
When we think about maybe the best versions of the church that we want to aspire to, it's been a group of people who've had a sense of a call from God to go out and to serve others, not really expecting anything in return. And so we've seen this, whether it involves the church going and feeding the hungry, whether the church is caring for widows and orphans, whether the church has been starting hospitals or founding universities. This has always been the way that the church has been at its best, going out and serving. So when I think about what that means for us today, I think one of those things is it means for us to listen to the realities that are coming into our view, and one of those is trauma, and the need for us to continue to go out and to learn what does it take, who is God calling me to be, so that I can go out and whether it's minister individually or minister through my leadership, to be able to kind of find today's version of the people who are ready to receive the love of God that the church has always sought to bring.
One of the ways I think the church could be helpful is to counter several myths that I hear out there in the church sometimes. And that myths like forgive and forget, or don't dredge up the past, or the Bible can solve all your problems. I think we just have to be really careful there. And churches have the ability to help people move forward so that they can actually grow through whatever issue is plaguing them down in the soul. This isn't just spiritual. There's something emotional, mental, soulful happening here. So churches can really help by directing people towards mental health professionals. I would hope that every pastor and every church leader would have just a small list of mental health professionals that they could refer people to. It really is necessary to have that list in each of our offices as church leaders.
When we think about entering into ministry, thinking about organizing our churches with consideration for those who've gone with trauma, we're invited to acknowledge the hard truth which connects us to the God who is truth. We're invited to be formed into people who can really express the fruits of the Spirit in ways that show love and care and compassion to others. In this, we discover the God who is beauty and who makes beauty out of difficult places. We discover the expression of the God who is pure goodness as he seeks to bring good to those who have been hurt. And we discover in trauma, which is often shrouded in darkness and in pain and in secrecy because of the hurt and the fear that it's come with, we discover that God can make a promise, secrets of ministry, new levels of things that we never saw before, as the prophet Isaiah teaches us in Isaiah 45:3, where God makes this promise to us if we are willing to be obedient and to enter into this. Isaiah says, "I will give you the treasures of darkness, the riches hidden in secret places, so that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who will call you by your name." This, friends, I believe, can be an opportunity to discover a new promise in the ministry of working with people with trauma.
Over and over again in the Bible, we see examples of God entering into the suffering of his people, seeing them where they are, and meeting them, and helping them to grow and heal. And that is what we, the church, the body of Christ, are called to do as well. Though I cannot fully understand it, the God of the universe knows my name. He knows my story, and he knows yours too. And this is the joy that we get to experience as the body of Christ, which is to know people, to see them, and to call them in to the full experience of the love of Christ.